A significant amount of Singapore-specific digital content is geo-restricted. It's accessible only from a Singapore IP address. This includes local streaming libraries, government digital services, banking apps, regional news archives, and platforms built specifically for the Singapore market. If you're outside Singapore and need reliable, consistent access to this content, the proxy infrastructure you choose determines whether it actually works. This video covers what counts as Singapore-only content, why standard VPNs often fail for this use case, and why Singapore mobile proxies are the correct tool for sustained access to geo-restricted Singapore platforms. Let me start by covering what falls into the geo-restricted category because it's actually pretty broad. Streaming and media platforms. meWATCH, formerly Toggle, operated by MediaCorp, is restricted to Singapore IPs. The library includes local Singaporean dramas, news content, live broadcast streams, not available on any international platform. The geo-enforcement is applied at the content delivery level. Non-Singapore IPs receive a geo-block error regardless of account status. Netflix, Disney+, Amazon Prime serve Singapore-specific content libraries, titles licensed only for the Singapore region. These aren't available from other country libraries. Accessing the Singapore library from overseas requires a verified Singapore IP, not just an account registered in Singapore. StarHub TV Plus and Singtel Cast similarly enforce Singapore-only access for live TV streams and on-demand libraries. Banking and financial services. Several Singapore banks, DBS, OCBC, UOB, apply geo-restrictions to their online banking portals and mobile apps. Users accessing from overseas may encounter additional verification steps, feature lockouts, or session rejections depending on the institution and transaction type. Investment platforms operating under MAS licensing, certain securities brokerages, robo-advisors, restrict access to Singapore-registered users accessing from Singapore IPs. This is a regulatory compliance mechanism. Government digital services. SingPass and MyInfo, Singapore's national digital identity infrastructure, apply access controls that include IP-based signals as part of session authentication. While not a hard geo-block, non-Singapore IPs can trigger additional authentication challenges or session flags. Data.gov.sg, the open data platform, is accessible globally for most datasets, but certain APIs and data feeds are throttled or restricted for non-Singapore access patterns. Business registry lookups through ACRA and certain SG Findex link services also apply IP-based access signals. E-commerce and marketplace platforms. Shopee, Lazada, and Qoo10 Singapore serve different product catalogs, pricing, and promotional content based on IP location. Accessing the Singapore storefront from an overseas IP often redirects to the regional version or surfaces different pricing. For competitive price monitoring or catalog research, a Singapore IP is required to see accurate local market data. Flash sales and limited release products may be access restricted to Singapore IPs specifically during the sale window, a mechanism to enforce local market-only promotions. News and information services. The Straits Times, Channel News Asia, and other Singapore news outlets restrict certain content, archived articles, premium analysis, live streams, to Singapore IPs or subscribers accessing from Singapore. Some restriction is paywall-based, but a portion is geo-enforcement applied independently of subscription status. Now, here's the problem with standard solutions. Most people reach for a VPN when they need to access geo-restricted content. For casual streaming, VPNs work adequately until platforms update their detection systems. For consistent, reliable access to Singapore-specific content, especially for business or research purposes, VPNs have significant structural limitations. Almost all consumer VPN providers route traffic through data center infrastructure, AWS, DigitalOcean, Volta, Hetzner. These IPs are straightforward to identify as non-residential using ASN classification databases. Platforms that care about geo-enforcement, banking portals, streaming services, regulated financial platforms check ASN origin and block data center ranges independently of the country the IP is registered to. A Singapore-registered IP from a data center range fails the residential authenticity check even if it passes the geo check. The result, you have a Singapore IP, but it's still blocked. Consumer VPN providers share IP pools across large user bases. When many users route through the same Singapore IP to access the same platforms, those IPs accumulate block flags quickly. VPN IPs known to be used for geo-unblocking are maintained on block lists by major streaming services and financial platforms. A VPN that worked yesterday may not work today. VPN connections drop and reconnection often assigns a different IP. For banking portals and authenticated sessions where the IP is part of session validation, an IP change mid-session triggers a security event. Additional authentication, session termination, account flag. For business-critical Singapore access, session IP stability is a requirement, not a preference. Singapore mobile carrier proxies solve these specific problems. They are the correct solution for this use case. Mobile carrier IPs are classified as consumer mobile traffic, the same ASN category as a Singapore resident on their phone. Platforms that block data center IPs based on ASN origin cannot block mobile carrier IPs without also blocking their legitimate mobile user base. This is a structural advantage, not a detection evasion trick. Singapore carrier IPs are not just registered to Singapore, they are physically routed through Singapore carrier infrastructure. IP geolocation databases classify them accurately as Singapore IPs with high confidence. There's no mismatch between registered location and routing path that would trigger geo-anomaly detection. Singapore mobile proxies support sticky sessions, maintaining the same IP for the duration of an authenticated session. For banking portals, e-commerce accounts, any platform tying session validity to IP consistency, this is essential. A session that starts from IPX and continues from IPX looks like a normal user. A session that changes IPs midway triggers fraud detection systems. Now let me cover who actually needs reliable Singapore IP access. It's broader than just casual streaming. Remote workers and digital nomads. Singapore-based employees working remotely from outside Singapore frequently encounter access issues with employer systems, banking portals, government digital services that verify Singapore IP origin. A dedicated Singapore mobile proxy provides consistent access without the instability of consumer VPNs. Market researchers and competitive intelligence teams, analysts tracking Singapore market pricing, content availability, platform behavior need to see what Singapore users see, not a redirected or adjusted view served to overseas IPs. This applies to e-commerce pricing research, media availability analysis, advertising verification, App Store data collection, ad verification and brand monitoring. Agencies and brands running Singapore-targeted campaigns need to verify that ads are appearing correctly in the Singapore market. The right creative, the right placement, the right pricing. This requires a Singapore IP to see Singapore-targeted ad inventory. Developers and QA teams. Development teams building Singapore market applications need to test how their product behaves for Singapore users. Geo-specific feature flags, localized content delivery, payment gateway behavior, regional compliance requirements. Testing from a non-Singapore IP gives inaccurate results for any component responding to location signals. Local SEO and SERP tracking. Singapore Google search results differ from results served to overseas IPs. Local PAC results, localized organic rankings, Singapore-specific rich results appear only for queries made from Singapore IPs. Tracking Singapore SERP performance accurately requires Singapore IP access for data collection. I need to be direct about limitations though. A Singapore mobile proxy provides a genuine Singapore carrier IP. It does not bypass authentication requirements, bypass two-factor authentication, or provide access to accounts you don't own credentials for. Platforms combining IP-based geochecks with device fingerprinting, hardware attestation, common in banking apps, have additional layers that a proxy can't address. For banking apps specifically, mobile apps with certificate pinning and device attestation will detect a proxy configuration at the app level regardless of the IP used. Web-based access through a browser is generally more proxy compatible than native mobile app access. For browser-based access to Singapore-only content, the setup is straightforward. Browser proxy configuration. Configure your browser to route traffic through the Singapore mobile proxy using the proxy's host, port, and credentials. This applies to all browser traffic without requiring system-wide proxy setup. Session mode. Use sticky sessions for any authenticated access. Banking portals, e-commerce accounts, media streaming logins. Sticky sessions maintain the same Singapore IP for the duration of your session. Rotation for research. For non-authenticated access, price monitoring, content availability checks, SERP tracking, rotating sessions give you access to a larger pool of Singapore IPs, reducing the risk of rate limiting on high-volume queries. User agent alignment. When using mobile carrier IPs, set your user agent to a mobile browser to match the IP type. A desktop user agent on a mobile carrier IP is a minor inconsistency that some platforms flag. Let me answer some common questions about accessing Singapore-only content. Will a Singapore mobile proxy work for meWATCH and MediaCorp content? Singapore mobile carrier IPs pass the geo-enforcement used by meWATCH and MediaCorp platforms. You'll need a valid account. The proxy provides the Singapore IP requirement, not account access. Can I access Singapore banking portals from overseas using a Singapore proxy? For web-based banking access, a Singapore mobile proxy provides the Singapore IP that satisfies geo-enforcement. Some banks apply additional verification for overseas access, regardless of IP. The proxy addresses the geo-restriction component, but not additional authentication layers your bank may require. Why does my current VPN stop working for Singapore streaming? Consumer VPN IPs from data center ranges are regularly added to platform block lists. When the IP your VPN uses gets flagged, access stops. Singapore mobile carrier IPs are not on these block lists because platforms cannot block them without blocking legitimate Singapore mobile users. That's why mobile proxies provide more reliable access than data center-based VPNs. How is a Singapore mobile proxy different from a Singapore VPN? A Singapore VPN typically routes through a Singapore data center IP, identifiable as non-residential by ASN classification. A Singapore mobile proxy routes through Singapore carrier infrastructure, Singtel, StarHub, M1, classified as genuine consumer mobile traffic. The IP type is fundamentally different, which is why mobile proxies pass checks that VPNs fail. Do I need a different proxy for each platform? Not necessarily. A single Singapore mobile proxy connection can be used across multiple platforms sequentially. For simultaneous multi-platform access or high-volume data collection across multiple platforms at once, you'll benefit from multiple proxy IPs to avoid cross-platform rate limit accumulation on a single IP. The bottom line, geo-restricted Singapore content is not bypassed by generic solutions. It's protected by systems that distinguish between genuine Singapore resident traffic and everything else. A Singapore mobile proxy is the correct infrastructure for sustained, reliable access to geo-restricted Singapore platforms because it legitimately represents the traffic class that these platforms consider authentic. Singapore mobile carrier users. If you need to access Singapore-only content reliably, whether for business research, competitive intelligence, or personal use, this is the foundation you need. Check out the detailed configuration guide at dataresearchtools.com. Subscribe for more geographic access and proxy strategy content. Next video, I'm covering how to set up proxies for accessing region-locked content across different markets. See you there.